of this dialogue. We remember in 2000, May 20, when President Chen made the inauguration speech, he was extremely conciliatory. One of the main stumbling blocks of the talk is the one China policy. China insists that you must accept, Taiwan must accept one China policy or principle as a precondition of any talk. But from Taiwanese point of view, if you accept one China policy, one China, there is nothing left to talk about. So this is the main stumbling block. But in this speech of inauguration in May 20th, President Chen was extremely conciliatory. He conceded to the point that one China problem, we could discuss it and put it as agenda of our future talk. And but China insists that it is a precondition. So this is again stumbling block. Taiwan, both sides say we want to talk, but China insists that you must accept first one China policy. Taiwan side said, we talk this as one of the agenda. So this again become obstacle. So what is the solution? Yesterday, I think on private party, one person asked why both sides don't like to sit down and talk. Everyone wants to sit down and talk, but under which condition? This is involving the principle. And because of this concession made by Chen, it costed him quite a lot of support. He was criticized by his supporter that he was too weak. He couldn't stand up to Chinese demand. So this is the situation. And lastly, I like to refer to referendum, which caused quite a lot of controversy, and including some uneasiness, to say the least, in the American government. And this referendum also criticized the ploy, the cheap ploy by the President Chen to get support. First, since 1919, when Wilsonian principle of self-determination was proclaimed, this right of self-determination became one of the basic motive or principle of Taiwanese democratic movement since under Japanese administration's time. So even under martial law in Taiwan until 1988 or 87, under those period when dissident was suppressed, this right of self-determination has been always the fixation, almost religious yearning for a religious longing of the democratic movement in Taiwan.
Were diffuse, and yet some stood out specifically, such as how to deal with the China factor. But much of the debates, discussions, focused upon which party was better equipped and experienced to lead Taiwan into the future, and which could basically deal with the China factor and improve the life and security of the people in Taiwan. The election itself, in the 3 months leading up to the election, all the public opinion polls persistently, day by day, week by week, showed the blue team with a little margin, either 3% or 8%, sometimes 10%, ahead of the green. There was one moment when they ran neck and neck, but the margin widened. Even 10 days before the election, it was clear that that margin was still substantially blue. There was then the expectation on the part of many that the outcome was fairly clear. But there was a series of events on Friday, March 19th, followed by the voting on March 20th, which, in a rather astonishing way, shifted a good deal of voting in a sympathy way toward electing the Green camp president and vice president. If we set up a chronology of those events on Friday, of course, if you're a protagonist supportive of Green, you're going to have answers for every one of those events. On the other hand, if you cash in on the programs of the Blue, you certainly will come out with the opinion that this was the weirdest election of all times. And I don't want to go over that argument with you because it's sort of futile at this stage. But clearly, the shooting and the rumors that followed did a lot in Central and South Taiwan to shift people's vote to Shui-bian. Number two, there was, of course, a number of invalid ballots found, claims made. This could have been a factor, along with what I just said. And of course, there was the triggering of the national security mechanism, and a number of military police and soldiers were not, or military people were not able to vote too. That too might have been factored in. So the outcome was rage, anger, a sense of being cheated by the Blue and all of their supporters. On the other hand, relief, buoyancy, a feeling of having come through a bitter struggle and prevailed. Siew has done it again for us. And a president that, almost a mocking way, ridiculed the losing party by saying, "You're poor losers." So the fallout, the feelings, the emotions felt on both sides were extremely deep and are not going to heal, I think, very quickly. If I'm pressed to the wall as to what I personally think in terms of this election, I have to say that the events of Friday, March 19th, do not add up and do require a special investigation committee to see what happened. Although the Blue team's leaders have filed suits, made certain proposals, threatened to have referendums, like my friend Professor Siew, I don't think that this is going to change the outcome. The current government, now re-elected, is a tough, sometimes ruthless in its efforts to win what it wants to win. And it will stonewall, and it will, I think, rely on the political appointees made in the last 10 years to the election committee and to the judiciary to make certain that this election results will be upheld. So I do not see any change in this election. I would be very surprised if this new government that's been just approved by the voters by such a slim margin will be able to do anything. At any rate, where does that leave the country now and in its relationship with its neighbors? I think democracy has taken a real pummeling, almost a sharp, painful, horrible wound that I don't think that people are going to get over very quickly. We saw demonstrations after demonstrations, some of them turned violent, and I'm sure that out of despair and fatigue, these people will soon go home. The streets will be empty again and business will resume as normal. But underneath, I would affirm that people are not going to trust their government anymore. Many more will not trust their government than before the election. Whether that brings us up to the 50% mark or something like that, I think is irrelevant. It's just that when a democracy that's evolving, the public begins to lose trust in its voting system, in its leaders who promise fair play and the practice of justice. That is a wounding kind of thing, and it will not heal quickly. The society and polity now in Taiwan is more divided than ever before. And one of the interesting new developments that came out of this election occurred in the big campaigns for February 28th and for March 1st. February 28th for the green camp, March 1st for the blue camp. One has to be astounded by the huge numbers of people that both sides managed to bring out onto the streets in the cities, the large cities of Taiwan. And it's even more surprising to see that the blue somehow brought more out on the streets than the green. I don't think all that was done by Huisran or bribing or whatever. I think this was a genuine attempt by the supporters of both parties to show up and support their party leaders. I have seen nothing yet on the part of the re-elected president to reach out and call for a healing process. In fact, he has now offered, he wants to have several referendums, one to reduce by half the legislative yuan, and the other to set up a commission to investigate the assets of the Kuomintang. Where do they get their money? It's as if his victory was not enough. Now he wants to drive the nail in the corpse and burn the corpse as well. So the healing process has not begun, and I don't know when it will begin. Vincent Siew has, of course, told us, I think, very astutely the difficulties of trying to get a dialogue going along after this big election. And Professor Peng himself has raised some issues as to why is it that both sides cannot have a dialogue and really get down to the nuts and bolts of finding a peaceful framework to live together. And Chun faces hard choices. His party is split. Society is more fragmented than ever before. And what really is the message that he can tell, since more people now distrust him than they did before? And certainly the leadership in Beijing has formed a very severe judgment about this re-elected president. And although he's a lame duck president in the sense that he cannot run again, he is going to be hard-pressed indeed to get any kind of consensus behind him to even deal with China. Least of all, try to carry out the political reforms of the Constitution and restructuring the government that he so has ambitiously talked about so far. So he is in the danger of also painting himself into a corner where he may not succeed. Just as, on the other hand, Beijing over the years has painted itself into a corner in terms of not being able to control the events taking place in Taiwan. There is, I think, a more complex, nuanced version of Taiwan nationalism that's emerging now than what I've talked about in the years past. It's clear that Taiwan nationalism does not just mean we want, of course, sovereignty, we want to determine it ourselves, and we don't give a damn about China. There is the feeling on the part of now many more than before that Taiwan is my home, but I'm also from China, either in the last 50, 60 years or the last several hundred years. And I too feel that I am Chinese, and I have that part of me connected with Chinese civilization. But yet the feeling of being Taiwanese too is powerful and continues to grow. We see it manifested in different ways. So this new, more complex, turgid type of mixture of Taiwan sentiments just makes it harder, I think, for the current political fragmentation to be sorted out and to come together into a new, fresh pattern of how we can deal with our challenges, particularly the China factor. There has to be a recognition in Taiwan that some kind of discussion about that begins with China. What does China actually mean to us, and how can we share it in some way with mainland China? I have long urged that the very recent statement a couple of years made by Chen Chi-chen to Taiwan, that we can sit down and talk about any kind of China, but we're not going to tolerate a situation of China being divided. And I think it's going to behoove the people in Taiwan to figure out a way how they can sit down and talk with China and not give away everything that they've worked for and earned and won by the sweat of their brow over the last 50 years, and even longer under Japanese colonialism and being a frontier area of the Qing dynasty. So, in some respects, the situation in Taiwan is now worse than what it was some weeks ago. But I have faith in the Taiwan people that they're creative, and maybe they can put away their wounds and come together and figure out how to sit down with China and work out a real arrangement of living under a greater China, both sides keeping their independence and somehow being able to cooperate in ways that are going to be good for them, good for Asia, and good for the world. Thank you very much.
Well, we've heard three very interesting and quite different perspectives on the election. Now to your questions. If you would identify yourselves and keep your questions as succinct as possible, and we'll get through as many as we can. Please.
This question is more related to the relationship between Taiwan and...
Maybe you could stand so that the audience can hear you too.
Stanford alumni, and this question is related more to the relationship between Taiwan and the U.S. today. Both of the speakers in the middle seem to suggest that after the election, Taiwan is going to pursue a policy of strategic ambiguity for eventual unification. And it seems to me that it's more like a policy of strategic hypocrisy toward eventual unification, and the U.S. is the one that's going to pay. And on the one hand, Taiwan says to the United States that you need to sacrifice your relationship with Beijing in order to support Taiwan. And then on the other hand, Taiwanese voluntarily invest more than $100 billion into mainland China, and they enjoy business privileges that American companies don't enjoy. And I just got three more points. And the Taiwanese also support Chinese geopolitical interests. They insist that the Senkaku Islands and the Spratly Islands are part of Chinese territory. They also insist that Tibet is part of Chinese territory, even though Tibet is occupied by Chinese soldiers. And Taipei Times reports that the military officers in Taiwan's military have gone to Beijing and given over secret data about American weapons sold to Taipei in exchange for lucrative jobs. And finally, it is strange, but the Taiwanese immigrant community in the United States produces a large number of the spies that actually steal American military technology and give it to Beijing. And the Clinton administration thought that this situation was so severe that they placed Taiwan on the list of hostile intelligence threats. This is the FBI list of hostile intelligence threats. So my first question is, how long do you think the American people will continue to support this kind of hypocrisy? And the second question is, and this kind of takes it to the extreme, what if the United States terminates support for Taiwan? What would happen to Taiwan?
Do you want to direct that at anyone in particular, or the whole panel?
Maybe the two guys in the middle.
This ambiguity is not based on the eventual unification of Taiwan with China. I don't think so. Even American didn't say so. The Taiwan's position is the future of Taiwan should be determined by Taiwanese themselves, without being dictated by us. So this premise that ambiguity is with with the prospect of unification, I don't think it is.
But if you're really so afraid of mainland China, why don't you put your money into Southeast Asia instead of making Taiwan?
That is, of course, business consideration. I am not businessman, but of course there's a contradiction. There's 100 billion investment in China, and so the contradiction is, on one hand, economically, as Mr. Chu say that Taiwan and China is much more close, but on the other hand, politically, the so-called unification or one nation, two system is no market in Taiwan, nobody, less than 10% people is different. So there's a contradiction. How do you solve this? I have no answer. Economically and politically is more and more Taiwan is falling apart from China. Same thing with Chinese own domestic policy. Economically, they are getting more liberal, free market and so on, but politically, they are very tight. They are not relaxing. So what's going to do China itself? The same kind of contradiction. Domestically in China, same what's going to happen in China. Economically more liberal. Politically is more, how do you call it, oppressive. No. So what is the result? Same thing, Taiwan and China. Economically getting closer, but politically getting far apart. So what is the result? Only time can tell. Maybe like a European Union, economically you have a common, how do you call it, euro, but politically they still keep uniqueness of the national character. Maybe this is the eventual thing. We don't know. There's no answer. Contradiction does not exist only between China and Taiwan economically. China itself, this government, their policy is contradictory. No one can, only Chinese speculate what's going to happen, economic and policy. So I can only say the thing is true, but no one, just only time can tell. And actual pragmatic circumstances will solve this problem.
What about the second question?
What's the question?
Let's say the United States just terminates support for Taiwan completely. In 1979, Carter.
This is a hypothetical question, but I cannot answer that. It will happen. This is all politics about. If it's happened, you have to deal with, and but this is quite hypothetical, and I don't think it will happen. As Mr. Charles said, that militarily and Congress and military defense, they think Taiwan is extremely important from their point of view. So this is highly hypothetical, and I don't see it will happen in the near future.
Talking about this so-called contradiction of the relation with China in terms of political and economic aspects. But politically, of course, we have been hostile against each other or confront with each other for long, that's more than 50 years. But economically, since China already opened up its door and become more market-oriented, market economy, so it become a gradually open market that attracts not only Taiwan, a lot all over the world. They pay more focus on Chinese market now. So where Taiwan as a free economic system, we certainly, the government, we commit to open up our economic and follow the marketing economic practice. So the government will also although we have a policy try to encourage our investor to pay more interest in the Southeast Asian country, but we also have the policy not to interfere our businessmen's judgment or their business activities with China. So that is the policy. I think it's very pragmatic, and it's a policy that serves the interests of Taiwan economy, which we simply cannot ignore the growing economic or marketing attraction from China.
Eric?
Mention has been made of the European Union. And if you look at that model, call that as a model, and its history, I wonder if it has some lessons actually for the Taiwan-China relationship. It began in a rather modest way. I think the first institution created was a coal and steel community. And then, there was the nuclear one, and then there was the Treaty of Rome in 1957, which was basically free trade. And then it proceeded over time, gradual accretion of powers. Not all one big thing, just sort of step by step. And the reason that happened was it paid off. The various parties found each of these steps useful, and it wasn't a big bang ever. But by the time 40 years had passed, really an enormous transformation. Now, I suppose this model is talked about in connection with Taiwan. That's what everything's talked about, I suppose. But it strikes me as a relevant model for how things might proceed. I mean, already partly that's there because of all the economic transactions. But can somebody comment on that as a model for what might make sense?
That is really a model that really makes sense. And that's the reason why by year 2001, after I retired from the government services, I have in Taiwan initiated this kind of idea, try to set up this model for stabilizing the relations across the Taiwan Strait. And so I have in Taiwan set up a so-called Cross-Strait Common Market Foundation, supported by a lot of businessmen in Taipei. And so with that, I visit China the year 2001, and also we have been promote strongly to this model. And I'm delighted to say that our foundation has been invited by the Forum for Asia, to be the founding member of the forum. And so with that capacity, I attend the Boao Commission year after year. Last year and this year, I'm going in a week time. So this is a model. I think I really feel that it makes sense. But of course, the both sides, the authorities on both sides, seems still very reluctant to comment on this. But as far as I'm concerned, I hope that can be promoted in the long term. If you look at this, the successful story of the European Union, I think what Ramon says that he hopes to see a greater China, and then if we can do through this kind of economic integration first, really that makes sense. So thank you.
I totally agree with what you say. It should be one of the models, but the only difference is that European Union was formed on the basis of free will, as a volunteer every nation willing to do, not under the threat of southern missile. That's the only difference.
Ramon, did you want to add to that?
Well, I'm just saying that the history of European states is special in itself, and they were able to deal with their nationalist impulses in the 19th century, and then when end of World War II, there was a sense that, you know, if we can get back on our feet economically, cooperating through the incentives that all of that was created for, it worked. But it's different than the way in which the Qing Empire and the communist government today, they don't have that history of nation states, and so their sense of nationalism is powerful, overwhelming, and they've got a history that they haven't been able to come to grips with yet.
I'm Jonathan Greenberg at the law school. I'd like to raise a question that relates to Korea. Korea, of course, there's many differences, but there's certain things that are similar. Both South Korea and Taiwan exist today because of U.S. military intervention in the 1950s. Both went through periods of military control and occupation, and both went through a democratic process to get rid of authoritarian governments. Now, my understanding about the Korean case, even today there's an article in the New York Times, is that the generational issue is really the core issue, that the voters divide very much on the generational lines as to the way they see the future of Korea, what it means to be South Korean, and their feelings about the United States government. But I gather when I spoke to Jean Oy, who spoke last week, when she went to Taiwan to monitor the elections, she was struck by how that was not the case in Taiwan, that both Pan Green and Pan Blue were filled with people from all generations. So I'm curious your take on the generational question. Do you think that the question of what it means to be Taiwanese and what Taiwanese nationalism is seen very differently between generations?
It is said so-called Taiwanese nationalism, but I am not really sure this is really the proper word to describe the feeling of Taiwanese. Now people use identity, rinton. This is a very peculiar, unique word. I understand in Japanese, there's no way of translating identity, rinton. So-called Taiwanese nationalism is not ethnic, not based on ethnic, because there is no such race as Chinese, no Chinese race. And so it is based on the historical experiences that they have undergone different historical process, different from mainland China under Dutch, Spanish, Japanese, KMT. So different these circumstances, historical circumstances, develop their own uniqueness in their way of thinking, their value. This is the things we are Taiwanese. So statistics show, as Mr. Shaw also said, that recently, in the beginning, 10 years ago, when you are asked, are you Chinese or Taiwanese or both Taiwanese and Chinese? Now over 40%, in the beginning, majority say, I am Chinese, or at least both Chinese or Taiwanese. Now, I think 42 or 43% now say that I am Taiwanese. And about 20 or 30%, 20% say I am both Taiwanese and Chinese. And less than 10% say I am Chinese. This is the latest figure. So this election, nearly 2,000 media people came to Taiwan to observe this election. And I think unanimous observation is that this Taiwanese identity problem is become so, identity thing becomes so strong. That reason why I say, they said politically, Taiwan is falling far apart. This doesn't mean they are anti-Chinese. It doesn't mean that. We are different from Chinese. This is a very strong feeling in Taiwan, and it is increasing in spite of those education. So this is a problem in Taiwan. This is a reality in Taiwan. So this have a very strong political implication in the future. This every foreign observer who came to watch this election agree on this point. It's written, reported in the States, reported in Japan and Europe. For instance, in only Danish, I don't know how many population Danish, and Denmark has. They sent 27 observers to Taiwan, all the professional media. So almost 2,000 media people come together. The unanimous feeling is that whether you like it or not, this Taiwanese identity is developing.
My name is Chada, a law school student from Taiwan. I have one big question and two short questions. The first question, because Professor Myers talking about the trust, so I would like to ask a bit of your opinion about how do you think the President Chen Shui-bian will regain the trust from the Taiwanese people, especially from the Pembroke people? And the second question is a follow-up question from Professor Greenberg. I think before this election, almost everybody will think the proportion of Pembroke people is bigger than the Pembroke people. But Professor Chen Shui-bian win this election again. So, in your opinion, do you think this proportion will change? I mean, the Pembroke people is bigger than the Pembroke people, or how? If your opinion is yes, why? And the last question, and maybe the most sensitive question, I would like to ask about every of your opinion. Do you think this election is fair or not? Why?
Fair or not?
This election is fair or not?
You want to tackle the first part, Ramon?
Oh, the element of trust, that's, when there's such deep suspicion and even mutual hate or detesting the other person, it's very hard to build trust. So this is going to take, I think it's going to take some time. And
how do you think the President Chen will do something to try to regain the trust of the
you mean, will
people,
President Chen try to respond to this issue?
or because
Well, I hope he does. I just can't predict what President Chen is ever going to do. Although I know the road, but the zigging and zagging, that's the thing. Was the election fair? No, I don't think the election was fair. I think the events of 19th on Friday were so extraordinary that it defies the imagination. This doesn't take the KMT off the hook. They made a terrible blunder by deciding to stop campaigning. If they had continued to campaign, remembering what the purpose of this election was all about, they might have won. So that's going to be one of the long-term big question marks. Just a brief aside on my colleague Professor Peng's comments about, he uses the statistics from the government about who's Chinese and who's Taiwanese and so forth. The one political scientist took a survey in which he would ask the question, "Are you Taiwanese?" And of course the person would say, "Yeah, I'm Taiwanese." And then he would talk and ask some more questions. Then he'd say, "Oh, are you Chinese?" He said, "Yeah, I'm Chinese too." And so when you aggregated those data, you got a much more equal figure there between who's Taiwanese and who's Taiwanese and Chinese. But if you ask the person, "Are you Taiwanese and Chinese?" The immediate reaction now, most people in the context of the life that they live day to day, week to week, is, I'm Chinese, I'm Taiwanese. But if you ask that question separately, you get quite different results, as this social scientist and some others have shown. So this problem is complicated. And, okay, I think that's it.
Any other comments on the fairness of the election?
I would like to also, and also the proportion of the young people become bigger than the, I mean, at the people after the election are still 50-50.
Fairness in election, I think always after election there are so many different opinions. I think even in the States I heard that someone still think Bush is still the presidency. So the only way is to go to the court, for court to judge, and now this case in the court. And we can speculate also many things, but without the very firm evidence, we can stand up in the court. It has to say even you lose by one vote, still you lose. And I think they invite expert with Chinese American what was his name? He came to Taiwan. He's a pro palm blue, yeah, palm blue position. But after his examination, he said this shot was made from outside and that jeep, and you physically, it's very hard to imagine how you can really stage this. Ask someone to shoot you, and this is in the jeep. The jeep is moving, and this president is waving, come this way, that way, and to anyone to shoot, just give him. That is how it is possible. I don't know, but so anyway, you have to go to the court to prove that, and so I wouldn't say it is fair or unfair. Any complaint after the election, which happened almost in any election, you have to go to the court to prove it. And
Vincent, do you have a last word?
No, last word, no.
This is the last question. Dr. Peng got an airplane to get.
I finally got a chance to ask the question. My name is Ming-Min, and I'm a PhD student at Stanford University, and very nice to see you here. And I think this is a panel discussion, so it's very important to share my ideas with you, because I know a lot of your thoughts about Taiwan from newspapers, articles, and mass media, but you never have a chance to listen to me. But I think it's very important. And I think it's very important because I am a citizen of Taiwan and I have a vote. So the first question, when I saw Mr. Xiao enter this room, I'm quite worried about the future of Taiwan, just because that there are two parties here, and Professor Peng and Dr. and Mr. Xiao never say hello to each other. Okay, so it's very.
Yeah, they did in my office.
Yeah, because we always talk about China and Taiwan the relation, we need to sit and talk. But when you sit and talk, you need to have something common in mind. Okay, at least in the topic, you need to say hello. Even you need to be pretend.
You accept that?
Okay, some of my idea is that I don't think the biggest threat is the missiles from China, but the biggest threat is the uncertainties and the disharmony in the beautiful island of Formosa. Okay, and the second, actually I'm not upset about who win the presidential election, but I am upset about the future of Taiwan is determined by two bullets. Okay. Those bullets is a good story for Hollywood movies, but it's not good for the future of Taiwan. And the third is that I don't want the politicians play the language trick For example, one China policy. What is one China policy? Actually, they have one China and the other one is Taiwan. And there's a one government want to like pursue the independence of Taiwan. Okay. I remember that the former president, Li Denghui, then he said one China policy, and then he want to pursue independence of Taiwan. And then right now at the election, he said that it is not necessary for Taiwan to declare independence. So actually, I think it's just a language trick. It's not actually good for everybody, it's just good for election. I don't like this kind of idea. Actually, I think it's very important that, yeah, the Taiwan's identity problem, what's the Taiwan's identity? We need to sit down and to think and to get everybody attention to say, okay, what's our goal of Taiwan? What's the future of Taiwan? And everybody need to try to feel that point. And the last idea is that I think it's very important to think about the younger generation in Taiwan, because at Stanford, I talked to several students. Some students, they like Shui-bian, but I say, okay, what's the policy? And they say, no, I don't know, but I am proud of to support him. It's very dangerous. Yeah, and why KMT cannot attract younger generations votes? So I think KMT need to think about this problem very seriously. Thank you.
Anybody want a last word from the panel?
Well, first, I have to say that we four of us, we have lunch together. Ambassador's room. So not only say hello, we are all friends. And Professor Pan, actually he was my professor. He taught me when I was in the college. So I have a very high respect to our Professor Pan. And then Ramon, Dr. Ramon Myers, is all friend of mine. And when we see each other, he knows that I didn't change. So we are so familiar. Of course, Ambassador Armacos is a very distinguished scholar and diplomat. So we all know each other, so there's no question of say hello. Say hello. We are so happy to get together. Secondly, you talk about this. You are worried about the uncertainty or the social harmony or social in Taiwan. Yes, that is a question that I have in my talk. That this is a challenge that President Chan has to face. And he has already said that in his next term, he has 4 major tasks that he had already in his mind. Number one, how to unite Taiwan, the unity of Taiwan. And that is secondary, is to stable the social order. And then the third is to improve the cross-strait relations. And number 4 is to reinvigorate Taiwan economy. And these are all his mental tasks. I'm sure, I hope that he can really do what he said. And then, when you talk about this, the most important is that the future of Taiwan. And it is, I do, really, I'm a man of not too much partisan color. I like the people in Taiwan to be more non-partisan. And what we think is for the future welfare of our people. So if we can get rid of so-called ideological differences or ethnic, well, actually we don't have that kind of ethnic differences. But because of this election language that makes the people very nervous about it. But since the election is over, I hope that can be all these wounds can be healed. So so-called the Taiwan identity actually is a sense. I fully agree with Professor Pan that this Taiwan identity doesn't mean it is a kind of sentiment against China. No, it is not an anti-China sentiment. It's a kind of a sentiment that the people living in Taiwan, all the people living in Taiwan, irrespective of their background or political affiliation, they have to love Taiwan. They have to do their best to contribute to the society and make Taiwan as a really lovely place to live for all the people there. And if you look, no matter whether you belongs to so-called Vincent or Vincent in Taiwan, if you go to China, they all take you as a Taipao. You all belongs to the same. It belongs to Taiwan people. They don't treat you as you are from Fujian, you are from Sichuan, no, even you were born in China, they don't treat you as a Chinese. So that's why people, the more our people visit China, we have been in the past 15 years of our opening policy to allow our people to visit China. There are more than 20, I think it's about more than 25 million visits from Taiwan to China. In other words, more than our people, population of people visit China. So they must know that why we have to identify ourselves as a Taiwanese, because China, they don't identify you as Chinese. They identify you as a Taiwanese. So you have to identify yourself first before you go out. This is the reason I think this kind of a new development in the Taiwanese society has to be taken into account when you are studying the Taiwan political development in the future. Well, the reason why the Pan Green, the Shui-bian, can increase his votes by about 1.6 million votes in the last 4 years, in spite of his very poor performances. I must say, very poor performances in my standard. In the government for 4 years, he still can get 1.6 million people more to vote for him. Why? That must be have some reason. And he has already talked that in his Washington Post interview, that he got the mainstream value of the people thinking is Taiwan identity. And he played that card all in his election campaign. And that makes sense. That make him to increase and make the people forget about all the poor performances he had in the past 4 years. So that's a reality. Well, we have to face that reality. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our members of the panel. This has been a terrific exchange. Thank you for your attentiveness and for your questions and your comments. Meeting's adjourned.